What is the issue we are going to debate today? Let me start by saying that before this crisis, this coronavirus crisis, the world saw a wonderful and amazing ecological movement led by the young people and the younger generation demanding to stop the climate change in an amazing way. It was a priority in the social and also pushing the political agenda in order to stop this catastrophe, which is the climate change. The corona crisis has to stop everything because the health emergency, of course, put the world attention in a global problem, another global problem like the climate change, which is the coronavirus crisis. No? But both problems were understood also comes from, let's say, a similar origin, which is the way we produce and consume things. So we are in sharing the diagnosis of what is happening, and it's really amazing to listen to young people, even children who understand better than some politicians sometimes the urgency to act and to react, because the way the world is going through the climate crisis is something that we cannot accept. And we share the idea that we must do something to stop the climate change, and at the same time, and this is the diverse approach to the question, is that we, meaning the three organizations that prepared this seminar, share the idea that we cannot do this without addressing at the same time the inequalities of the economic systems, and at the same time the social injustice that the contemporary capitalism is putting in the world today. This double approach is something that we want to share also with you, and the different, not approach, but different ideas coming from different fields of the progressive forces, the progressive political science in Europe we have, in order to have a conversation and a huge dialogue that we are convinced is needed in order not only to listen to each other, but to learn each other, in order to have some common approach in order how to stop and reshape the world. We understand that we cannot go in the same path. So in order to do this, I mean, how can we change the situation in a way that the human being as a race, I mean, as a species, can do it better than today, not only because of the health crisis, but also of the climate crisis, the economic crisis, and the social injustice. At the same time, putting it in the same framework is something that we really want to do during this seminar. So I finish only saying that one of the way of doing this, we are convinced, is collaborating, cooperating, and organizing dialogues to share knowledge, because we're talking about science, we're talking about data, we're talking about a scientific approach of how to resolve these problems. Aurélie Marchal said to me the other day that there is nothing more materialistic than ecology. If you are an ecologist, you have to study science, the same like if you study economy or other fields. And my last sentence in this small introduction is just to thank the European Forum to give us the opportunity for different people, different movements, of, in this case, different European foundations, to work together and to know each other better in order to work in the future. If we can, in the only profit we want, which is to improve people's life and to change the way the world is doing things, because we consider it unjust, and in the case of climate change, like a suicide path, something that we needed to address. So this is my small political introduction to the debate, and let me just take 1 minute to share with you the methodology of how are we going to organize this seminar. I'm going to give the floor at the beginning to the three representatives of the three organizations who share the idea of organizing this seminar. These three organizations are three European foundations, political foundations, that come together in this seminar. One is the Green European Foundation, which is the foundation linked to the Green Party in Europe. The other is the foundation of the Europe Progressive Studies, the FEPS, which is the foundation linked with the social democracy tendency in Europe. And the last one is Transform Europe, which is the network organizing foundations and center of studies of the, let's say, the radical left and linked with the European Left Party. I'm going to give the floor 5 minutes to some of the leaders of these organizations to share with you not only the big issue of our seminar today, which is climate change and the reduction of the CO2 emissions and eradication of poverty, but at the same time to know each other better, to understand what is the framework where this seminar is going to be developed. So I'm going to give the floor for the in the first moment to Aurélie Maréchal. She is the political director of the Green European Foundation. She is a green activist for so many years, and she was an assistant, I think, for the European Parliament for so many years. But what's the most important thing, she's an internationalist. He studied in Peru, in Belgium, in the United Kingdom. And I'm eager also to listen what the Green European Foundation thinks about this issue and what she wants to share with you today. So Aurélie, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci Marga, merci à toutes et tous. C'est un plaisir d'être avec tout le monde, voilà, virtuellement ce soir pour cet événement, cette troisième édition en fait d'un séminaire commun entre nos trois fondations. Donc peut-être en quelques mots, simplement donc pour vous dire que la Fondation verte européenne, comme son nom l'indique et que Marga l'a déjà signalé, est rattachée au mouvement écologiste, est rattachée au Parti vert européen, mais comme toutes les fondations politiques ici autour de la table, a un rôle avant-gardiste, a un rôle d'animation du débat, un rôle de lien avec des citoyens qui va au-delà de la politique de court terme. Ça, c'est un très, très résumé. Pour plus d'informations, pour ceux qui voudraient en savoir plus sur tout ce qu'on fait, il y a notre site web. Mais donc, directement sur la problématique d'aujourd'hui, un mot d'abord sur la manière dont nous, écologistes, et surtout nous, ici à la Fondation, on aborde en fait les questions du climat, de l'urgence environnementale et de la manière dont on veut transformer la société au niveau européen, c'est qu'on a vraiment résolument, nous, une approche que je vais qualifier de transnationale. Donc, on a vraiment beaucoup de nos projets qui sont le fruit d'échanges entre nos propres membres et nos partenaires dans des pays européens, alors de l'Union européenne, mais aussi au-delà. Et on croit, nous, très fort en la valeur des échanges voilà, à travers les frontières. On croit très fort en l'idée d'une Europe qui ne soit pas imposée depuis Bruxelles par des bureaucrates, mais qui soit vraiment créée par les citoyens, par les chercheurs, par les politiciens aussi, sur le terrain à différents niveaux. Et donc, c'est vraiment dans cette démarche-là qu'on essaye d'enrichir en fait le débat. Et l'orateur que vous allez entendre après, Jonathan Essex, est en fait un des représentants de notre réseau et ce dont il va vous parler est notamment le résultat de ce genre d'approche et de débat déjà entre écologistes de manière transnationale. Et donc aujourd'hui, la démarche d'aller un pas plus loin, comme on l'a déjà fait plusieurs fois, et d'avoir cette approche transpartisane, pour nous est évidemment très importante pour faire avancer les idées, gagner la bataille des idées, j'ai envie de dire, dans le bon sens. Par rapport à, évidemment, cette immense question qu'on essaye d'aborder aujourd'hui en 2 heures, immense question aux nombreuses ramifications, je ne vais pas pouvoir vous faire, et personne ne pourra faire, évidemment, le tour de la question en quelques minutes et puis ici dans les 2 heures. Je voudrais peut-être juste pointer un élément par rapport à notre approche globale et puis 2-3 éléments de contexte parce que finalement, c'est ça aussi qui fait la différence par rapport au fait de parler aujourd'hui du climat ou il y a 1 an ou il y a 10 ans. Alors peut-être sur notre approche, ce qui pour moi est un simple rappel, mais qui finalement est intéressant à dire dans un forum où il y a des sensibilités progressistes différentes, c'est que finalement l'approche écologiste, on peut la résumer comme une approche systémique. Et donc, moi, j'aime à répéter que je ne suis pas écologiste pour sauver les petits oiseaux. Alors, évidemment, il faut sauver aussi les oiseaux, mais je suis écologiste pour permettre que toutes et tous puissent mener une vie décente dans les limites et les capacités physiques de notre planète. Et donc, je pense que cette intersection entre l'environnement et la dimension sociale de solidarité de notre vision, elle est très importante. Et elle se réalise par la mise en place de modèles économiques qui soient alternatifs, dans le sens qui aillent au-delà de la course à la croissance du PIB effréné, qui aille au-delà de la centralisation du pouvoir économique. Enfin, il y a beaucoup d'autres exemples. Mais donc, je pense que c'est vraiment, c'est pas dire on va mettre un petit peu de social dans l'environnement ou on va faire un petit peu d'économie verte. C'est vraiment penser ces trois composantes de manière très liée. Et je pense que notre orateur pourra vous donner un aperçu de la manière dont on peut le faire. Donc ça, c'est vraiment la manière dont nous, on approche les choses et ce qu'on espère amener aussi au débat dans une perspective transpartisane, c'est vraiment cette vision systémique des choses. Et donc, je pense qu'aujourd'hui, pour conclure, on a évidemment un cadre nouveau qui est très intéressant au niveau européen, qui est le pacte vert, je pense qu'on dit comme ça en français, le Green Deal. Le pacte vert qui est évidemment très important et très intéressant comme cadre, mais qui, de notre point de vue écologiste, est tout à fait insuffisant, tant au niveau environnemental qu'au niveau du modèle économique qu'il propose ou que par rapport aux solutions qu'il offre, ou plutôt qu'il n'offre pas encore pour la société, pour la célérité dans la société. Et donc, je pense que c'est vraiment à partir de ce cadre du Green Deal et maintenant les outils que sont le Green Recovery, je ne connais vraiment pas ce mot en français, c'est par ces outils-là, et évidemment dans un contexte de pandémie, et je pourrais en dire beaucoup plus là-dessus, mais je n'ai plus le temps, c'est dans ce cadre-là qu'on essaye maintenant, nous, de s'inscrire avec un regard critique sur un réel futur soutenable dans une vision systémique. Voilà pour cette brève introduction.
Thank you very much, Aurelie. I'm sure we are going to talk about the Green Deal a lot this afternoon. So I'm going to give the floor to Uwe Optenhauer, who is the Vice President of the Foundation of the European Progressive Studies, which is the foundation linked to the social democracy. Uwe is a political scientist, an economist. He's a very well-known person in Europe. Basically, I will say that he's one of the person who knows, I don't know how to say it, is an expert in European and international political field and analysis. He has been a consultant of several politicians and writing a lot of articles you can find through the website. So I'm going to give the floor directly to Ove for his introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Marga, for your kind introduction. Let me first thank our partners, Transform Europe and the Green European Foundation, for this cooperation. Third time, as Aurélie said, and good again, I would say. I also wanted to stress that we appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the European Forum, which is the broader framework in which our seminar, our workshop is taking place. A couple of words on FEPS. FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, is the think tank of the socialist and social democratic family at EU level. Our mission is to develop innovative research, policy advice, training, and debates to inspire and inform progressive politics and policies across Europe. I think this spectrum of activities is pretty much similar to what Transform and the Green European Foundation is doing in their respective areas. FEPS works very close in very close partnership relationships with members and partners. We are a membership organization. At the moment, we have approximately 43 full members and a certain number of observer members. It's really an attempt to work with the members very closely, not only in Brussels. We are a platform and a hub for them in Brussels, but we try to go local and we try to go to the respective member countries and carry European politics and political content to the different member countries of the European Union. I think this is an aspect that cannot be overestimated, because as we know, the Union is very often still suffering a credibility problem, and very often just an information problem. And by the way, I think the Commission and the European institutions should go more local. One last aspect I wanted to stress about FEPS is that for a while already, we have a particular program directed to young European citizens, to the millennials, as we call them. And that has been one of the success stories in FEPS lately. But we always see and feel that it's often not easy to bridge the expectations of young European citizens with the behavior and the way the Brussels bubble is tackling political issues. So far about FEPS, I just want to make a very brief general remark on the subject we're discussing today, because it's really not my subject. I'm not the expert here. This is Said, who will later on talk on behalf of FEPS. But I think the overriding challenge we are facing today is how can we achieve sustainability and equity between people, regions, countries, and generations in a post-COVID EU. So I feel, or I think that as the coronavirus pandemic is still unfolding, the relevance of the European Green Deal and its potential role in recovery plans is heavily discussed. There are even some who argue that it needs to be delayed or abandoned altogether. And that is obviously not our position. I think progressives, the answer of progressives should be that the Green Deal becomes an even more essential policy in the new context of recovery from the recession, and provides an unexpected opportunity not to return to the past, but instead build back better or recover better than would have been the case before the pandemic. Progressive should warn against an unsustainable recovery pathway, which would waste precious public funds on shoring up the fossil fuel economy and lock European youth and future generations into destructive high carbon and unsustainable pathways. The current COVID pandemic has opened up a new understanding of the interrelation between humans, wildlife, and our shared ecosystems, and also the meaning of well-being and healthy living. So I would say, against this background, the European Green Deal is a necessary part of the EU recovery plan, of course. It has to be well reflected in the MFF, the multi-annual financial framework. The Green Deal must be designed and implemented by putting fairness and equity at its very core. We have to avoid unnecessary trade-offs between the recovery of economies, societies, and ecosystems. Operationalizing the principle of leaving nobody behind is paramount. So this requires addressing the intra-EU, the intra-country, and the intergenerational equity challenges that lie at the heart of the multiple environmental crises. This is very general, but I think it marks the point of departure where we find ourselves as socialists and Democrats at the moment. I'm really curious to see tonight where we have common ground amongst us, where there are the differences, and where we can work together, and where we still have to straighten out certain things. I look forward to an open debate also connected to the LinkedIn audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uwe. I'm sure we are going to talk about these questions like the recovery plans and also the challenges you have put on the table. So the last foundation is the Transform Europe, which is my foundation too. So it's an absolute pleasure for me to give the floor to Connie Hildebrand. She is the co-president of Transform Europe Network. She has been working from inside Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Berlin, particularly in the Institute for Critical and Social Analysis. She's a political sciences. She has a fine spell for political and critical analysis in a very, very serious way. I really admire her. She's my friend. So please, Connie, take the floor.
Many thanks, Marga, for the wonderful words about my person. I will give you some words about Transform. And Transform was founded in 2003 during the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre. And I think that is important because this wonderful event created new forms of cooperation between the huge diversity of the radical left and beyond the traditional left. And today, Transform Europe is a network of 35 European organizations from 22 countries. Our network is a cooperative project of independent non-profit organizations, institutes, foundations, and individuals. Transform Europe is a political foundation of the European Left Party. We spoke about this. And we are active in the field of political education and critical scientific analysis. With our work, we want to contribute to peaceful relations between people and to a socio-ecological transformation of the present world, maybe more or less the same as Aurélie and Uwe spoke about this. And our work our goals and value include overcoming war, the dominance of capital over labor, social injustice, patriarchy, imperial rule, militarization, as well as racism and anti-Semitism. And our work is aimed at creating an association, and that is remembering to Marx, association in which the liberation of the individuals is a precondition for the liberation of all, as a society in which people can live in dignity, social justice and social security, in peace and in a sustainable development. And you can see the overlapping topics when you have heard before. Transform is a network. That means we are part in international events, for example, in the European social forums and the World Social Forums. Transform is the actor for political education, and that means a part of international works for popular education, strong connected with the Latin America comrades. We are organizing trainings and summer universities for activists, and we also support, of course, the Summer University of the European Left Party. Furthermore, we organize seminars about popular education, for example, for our partners in the trade unions and in the social movements. And Transform understands itself also as a think tank. We are on the way to develop our transnational research, for example, on the impact of the employment relationship on the political attitude of workers. We organize seminars. We discuss, for example, the strategy of the left, includes the radical left. We analyze also our parties, sometimes also critical. We are looking for a new strategy for social ecological transformation, what we speak today as the Green New Deal, as a left-wing Green New Deal. Maybe we see some differences, but I'm sure we see a lot of common grounds in these questions. What we also discuss is the question of the democratization of our society. And we also discuss the possibilities of the democratization of the European Union, including, of course, the need to change the EU treaty. In 2021, we will have a set of conferences, including about the future of Europe, And of course, we have a lot of conferences against the climate change. And we organized meetings and conferences and seminars against the far and political right. In recent weeks, we have reflected on the impact of COVID-19, and therefore we discuss the lengths how we need to rethink the role of the state. And I think the role of the state as the instrument for re-regulation and control, but also the question of democratization of the state, of politics and economy, is one very important topics for us. I want to give you only some comments about the working method. We work together with, or we working in working groups, and we try to develop such working groups with including experts from the national levels, also from our member organizations and their partners. And I want to give you only the overview of our working groups, because sometimes it's useful to invite also you in this working group. That means the productive transformation and socio-ecology, the working group to the commons. I would say it's an increasing working group with more and more importance. Of course, important for us is also the strategic perspective of the European left, the strategy for our CEE countries, the cooperation between the states in Europe in the periphery of Europe, the cooperation with the different developments and with the different social movements, the Marxist feminist, and of course also the left theory. And global strategy and the question of migration. The last question is also important. And I'm really happy that we have in our meeting today also our comrade, Roland Kuhlke. He is responsible for the productive transformation working group. And this working group is main, has a lot to do with the topic what we discussed today. And Roland was involved in the preparation process of this seminar, but not only in this seminar, it's clear that we have also in the next year the Green New Deal and the strategy for a Green New Deal on the table for the next years. So, of course, what we are doing strong connected also with the party of the European left, and I think we will develop this cooperation and also the cooperation with the GUE NGL, with the left-wing faction in the European Parliament. Many thanks. That was the words about Transform.
Thank you very much, Connie. So let's go to the deep to the question. So for that, we have invited 3 researchers and 3 specialists that have been appointed by the 3 foundations organizing this seminar. So I'm going to give the floor first to Jonathan Essex, later to Said El Kadarawi, and later to Manuela Kropp. I'm going to give them the floor for 15 minutes, more or less, and just to see different approaches to this problem of how can we face the reduction of emission at European level. So in the first place, Jonathan Essex, so please.
Well, thank you very much. And at this point, I think I'm going to share my screen. I'm a civil engineer as well as a member of the think tank Greenhouse and a local councillor. So some of the information I present has got lots of numbers and ideas. So hopefully this will be interesting. So what I've called this short presentation is climate agreements and trade deals, as I think that's our biggest challenge, and also scale and infrastructure, because I think as Greens, we recognise that it's the scale of our built environment that needs to change, and the scale of our consumption of materials and energy, which really drives the climate problem. And we really need to address scale and how capitalism, or you could say the building of more capital, makes the problem worse. So this slide just summarises up what I'm going to say. We can't continue to grow infrastructure, industry, trade around the world, because this increases the scale and the speed and the separation, the ways in which we are making our world more unequal, and we are failing to deal with the climate emergency. Poverty and climate emergency. These issues are currently both getting worse. The slide on the left is from the blog of Jason Hickel, who recently wrote Less is More. That shows that inequality is growing not just within our countries, as we know in Europe, but between us and the global south. And on the right, this is an old picture, but it illustrates that we are living in an ecological, not just a climate emergency. The little red part on the top is climate. Biodiversity is already recognized as being a bigger problem, more of an emergency. So we need to look more and wider than just the climate itself. This is how I would say it. We can't just have our cake and eat it. We can't eat the whole cake. We need to leave some for nature, and we need to have the cake for future generations. But it's not just about us. We need to do this in such a way that those people around the world who don't have a voice still get some of the cake too. So in the UK, we're declaring a climate emergency. In the EU, there's the declaration of a Green Deal or a Green New Deal. And I would say this is not just recognizing this as emergency, but recognizing the way in which we respond needs to change. We can no longer think about what we do in the short term and what we do in the long term. We must change now, and we must make those changes led by, not just by governments and businesses, by all of us working together. But critically, we need to do this not just looking at what's in our own interests. We need to look at the whole planet. We need to look at all the people in it. We need to consider not just the economies within the Europe, different European countries, but also the ways in which people have livelihoods around the world. Now, so far, we've come so far on this journey. We've focused mostly on electricity. We've got renewable energy generation, but there are still parts of our economy in Europe which really haven't changed very much in the last 20, 30, 40 years since we first recognized that climate change was a problem. We still use concrete made in the same way. We still use steel made in blast furnaces. We still make plastic from oil in the same way as we always have done. And our transport in road transport, in shipping and in aviation all burn different parts of oil. This together needs to be addressed. Unless we deal with these difficult technical challenges, we are not going to deal with climate change. But the challenge we have is not just to deal with them in a technical way. And I'll give you just one example. If we shift all of our cars from petrol and diesel to electric vehicles and do nothing else, their emissions won't go down. All we'll do is spend more manufacturing them and slightly less driving them. We need to, as we shift to electric cars, shift to having far, far less cars, as we do car sharing, as we shift to public transport, as we shift to walking and cycling, as we localize our economy. Unless we have these wider changes, then the way in which we address these technical challenges won't lead us to a better future. So that's why I think we need to talk about jobs. We need to talk about livelihoods. We need to make sure that the way we meet the climate challenge changes the structure of our economy. It must reduce the overall energy use through demand reduction, as well as increasing our production of renewable energy such that everything is produced renewably. And that change is not therefore about lots more concrete or steel. It's about work. It's about people doing different jobs, which brings about a different future. The alternative is this. You can read the whole book if you like. It's from Saskia Sassen. She is a studier of cities and how they impact on people. But she basically describes the world as it is now. We're having more people living in cities, and more people are not just being excluded, but she describes them as being expelled. An expulsion of areas of the planet and large numbers of people from being even considered by the economies of the rich countries around the world. And you know, as we reach the limits to growth, as we have already got more resource consumption globally than we can cope with, the current response from governments and big business around the world is pushing planet to the point of collapse, but pushing many people's livelihoods to become more and more precarious and more unresilient. So I think we need a just transition to respond to that. This is about shifting from high to low carbon jobs to get to zero carbon as the way in which we move from high to low carbon sectors. And I'll give you 3 examples briefly in this presentation. That's energy production, how we consume carbon, and then how we need to reduce how we're continuing to scale up both. So firstly, we need to shift energy workers, the workers involved in high carbon production of energy, to the renewable sector. But the good news is this. This is a survey done by Platform, a charity in the UK. And they found that 81% of offshore oil and gas workers in the North Sea wanted to shift to the renewable energy sector instead. And today, I listened to councillors on the council where I am voting against drilling a new gas well. This planning application was introduced by the developer saying, we can have our cake and eat it. But the politicians responded today and they said, no, a different way is needed. A different way forward is possible, even here in England. Yesterday, the Greenhouse think tank with a trade union and others produced this report. We found that rather than bailing out airports and the aviation sector as they are demanding, if the governments were to put that same money into creating jobs, creating local green deals in those airport cities, then we could find a transition from loss of COVID jobs to creation of green jobs. So it would be 13 times better than bailing out airports. But I think we also need to deal with the big issues. It's not just what we do within our countries that counts, but how we connect our countries together. Currently, the global climate agreement we have agreed at Paris ignores international aviation. It ignores shipping. It ignores the energy embodied in what we import from China. We looked at what that means for the UK. We found that for every ton of material that we bring in or export to countries outside the EU is 5 times worse in the transport emissions than our trade within the EU. Simply, if you transport things a greater distance, we tend to fly rather than ship or train, and the impacts get much worse. So I've said already this, you know, facing up to climate reality, it's not just about facing up to climate reality in terms of the climate science driving our politics, but really thinking about how that changes the structure and the nature of capitalism and how our economy is structured and how that links to our politics. I'll focus on the elephants and snails here. You know, instead of focusing on growth forever as somehow an illusionary thing which we can get and then say, well, COVID is going to either lead us into a recession or a stagnation, which one are we going to have? We should be looking forward in a different way. And that's where the snail comes in. It's not just a different kind of elephant, it's smaller. So a quick question, a rhetorical question, because I guess I'm not going to ask you for the answer. So in the last 28 years since we started dealing with this, or saying we were as politicians in the UK in a serious way, the UK's carbon emission has gone down. It's not gone down as much once you add in imports, but it's gone down. But which sector, which emissions went up during that time? Okay, well, I think I'm going to have to give you the answer this time. It was transport. It was mainly freight and it was mainly air travel. So while, you know, the current structure of the world is this, governments blame us, the individuals, on the problem, and then they say we need to make personal changes. And then they make big investments with companies that continue to drive growth. Instead, we need to accept it's the big decisions, It's the expansion of airports, it's the building of roads, it's the tax avoidance of these sectors, which is making it harder and harder for us as individuals to play our part. Infrastructure, when we invest in big things, that locks us in to bigger and bigger scale of emissions. So initiatives like the Trans-European Transport Networks, which includes the high-speed train network in the UK, link up to the China Belt and Road Initiative, which now delivers something like 30 trains a week from China to Germany of goods. Cities and Infrastructure for Growth is one of the UK's investments in Africa and Asia, and it sums up our vision: replicate it around the world and let them make the same mistakes we have. And then this sort of infrastructure approach leads us to focus on what we produce, not also how we change how we consume. So instead of trade trumping climate inequality, produce and export goods outside of tax, instead of focusing on supply and demand, we need to do things differently. We need to stop this idea that we'll all the time produce more, because that will drive up demand. We need to stop the idea that somehow trade deals are the way to a better future. It seems to be that at the moment, the way we're talking about it in our news. And we need to stop investing in infrastructure. Every time you build more road capacity or more rail capacity or more airport capacity, you have more vehicles, more products, and more energy use. This is something Greens have been standing on the front of this change for decades, but it's not the time now to allow us to simply talk about renewable energy while we continue to expand roads. So we need to block what is stopping our economy changing, and we need to open up the possibilities that enable us to change. So what we've done in Greenhouse, our think tank, is look not just at where we need to go, but what we need to do to get there. What are the political and economic changes we need to make to unlock where we go? And we found one particular challenge, which hasn't really been a focus of progressive politics recently, which is challenging the decision-making for new capital investments. It's capital investments, it's big bits of infrastructure, it's new towns. That's what drives capitalism, investing to get a return on investment. We quite often refer to ourselves as a developed country, you know, the UK. And, you know, other countries around the world, they're still developing, but we're developed. Well, in that case, why have we still got so many developers? I mean, we need to get beyond investing capital through developers. We need to do things differently to move forward. And here are just a few examples from our recent research. We have this pointless trade where we export 125,000 tons of salmon, mainly by air, and then we import the same amount of fish back again. We fly fish to China and America, and then we ship frozen fish back from places like Norway. Completely pointless, but that's how our society works. Half the weight of what we import and export to the UK is oil, coal, and gas. And this is just to highlight that our culture needs to change. You know, while we want fashion quickly changing, then we are flying our fashion around the world. And, you know, here we are, 6.6% of our weight of t-shirts in the UK, if you like, is causing nearly 4/5 of the climate impact. And this is based on a system and supply chains that lock people into poverty while accelerating climate change. So this is applying to trade, but it applies to other sectors as well. We need to firstly think about how we make things smaller. Rather than every bit of infrastructure being asked, bigger is better, we need to say better, not bigger. We need to say big enough already. We need to say, as E.F. Schumacher did in 1972, that small is beautiful. Secondly, if we accept that we make the economy smaller, we can bring much more things from close to where we live, particularly heavy things like food and building materials. That will help the culture and character of where we live. And that means we can accept that shift from elephant to snail by going slower. And that will give us more time to connect to people and value people, not the goods we consume as being who we are. So that's our basic choice that we would say. To deal with the climate emergency in a way that addresses poverty means we have a basic choice. We can't, on the one hand have one, on the other hand have the other, and try to do both of these things together. We need to make a choice. Either we have business as usual globalization, which continues to expand the scale of our economy, our material and energy consumption, or we relocalize economies, relocalize jobs, transform livelihoods to bring about a zero carbon future. We can't do both. We need to choose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your extraordinary, really very good presentation. I think we can share it with all the assistants, and also to keep in mind, particularly your last recommendations, who I think go really to the point that is in the debate now. So let's go now to what Said El Kadrawi, I don't know if I pronounced it properly, sorry, wants to say to us. He's a special advisor of FEPS. So Said, when you want, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Marga. And also thanks to the organizers for this excellent idea to bring the progressive think tanks together and discuss this crucial issue, not only for today, but I guess for the next decades. Let me first agree with the starting point of the discussion. Our current socio-economic model is not sustainable. And if we do not drastically rethink our production and consumption model and the key systems that define the way we live and work, the energy system, the mobility system, the food system, the built environment, and so on, we will be confronted with ever more crises. The increasing number of extreme weather events are a clear signal of the potential devastating effects. But as we all know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And as has been emphasized by the COVID crisis, issues are very much interlinked and can exacerbate each other. At the global level, the failure to act on climate will result in more droughts here and more floods there, with water shortages, food crisis, inequalities, migration pressures, social and political instability, tensions as a result. So addressing global warming and developing ambitious climate policies is not a nice to have. It's actually a necessity. It's about much more than just reducing emissions, although this is of course a crucial element, but it's a more comprehensive exercise that we need to do. It was emphasized before already. And this galaxy of challenges related to global warming and its consequences coincides with a number of other developments. First of all, let's not forget that global population is still growing. And we expect, of course, people, especially in developing countries, that they also want to have access to, the nice life we have here in Europe, with all its consequences. Africa, for instance, we expect the population to double in size by 2050 and to be multiplied by 4 by the end of the century. Another thing is that, we are experiencing a new type of industrial revolution, the digitization, that has the potential to support and accelerate the transition to climate neutrality. That's for sure. It can, for instance, support a more circular, resource-efficient economy by facilitating, the reuse or repair or recycling of products, create also local jobs. But we all know that it entails a lot of other challenges, the potential to create new inequalities or concentrate economic powers in the hands of a few companies. That's actually what's happening. So we need to address the green and the digital together, design this transition in such a way that actually these two reinforce each other, link it also with the requirement to reinforcing our democratic model, because making this transition a success will only happen if this is becoming a societal project, not only a top-down exercise that can be forced upon people. So basically we need to reinvent our socio-economic model, but also rethink the functioning of our democracies. So it's indeed a systemic thing. It's complex, and therefore it needs to be managed. I think it's fair to say that somehow the vision, the long-term vision, luckily, is there in Europe, despite the criticism we may have on the Green Deal. But I think the Green Deal at least shows the direction of travel towards this climate neutral and circular economy by 2050. But it is certainly also true that there are still many unknowns. And one thing is to have a vision and targets. Another is to implement the measures on the ground and make it happen. But what is sure is that this transition will require strong and smart government, able to anticipate, to think strategically, to be agile. And the COVID crisis has reinforced this assumption. It showed the lack of preparedness in Europe. So we need to be more proactive instead of reactive. We also need to ensure consistency and coherence across policy levels and between policies. Ensure also, and that's I think something we all agree, ensure also that the human factor, the social dimension is fully integrated. Because, as I said before, without the support of the people, we will not be able to implement some of the necessary measures. And we all know that the impact of the transition, of any transition, by the way, is different depending on where you live. Regional disparities can grow, depending also on your personal situation, depending also maybe on the sector where you are working in. So we need to, carefully reflect about this. This is, of course, about policies, but it's also about methodologies and about governance systems. The key question is, how can we activate a wide range of policy tools jointly in support of our long-term societal objectives? In theory, the architecture of the mechanics to keep us on track on our journey towards climate neutrality is being designed. You know that in the Parliament and in the Council, currently we are discussing the climate law that foresees a 5-yearly update, of our level of ambition, of our policies in line with the Paris Agreement. That's an opportunity to look where we are and adjust our policies. I think it will be important when we assess where we are to also calculate the cost of action and the cost of non-action, to make that visible, because people always ask question, oh, it's so expensive, to invest in climate, but it's of course much more expensive not to do that. Another thing I think we should do more systemically is to integrate the social dimension, to calculate the distributional outcomes. Who is actually benefiting and losing in this? Who is most affected? And kind of build in the design of our climate policies, the social dimension from day one. But we also need to ways to support and scale up fast, innovative solutions, products and services. I like very much the mission-oriented approach that the Commission is now developing with regard to innovation and research. We should, choose a number of battles and invest in addressing these and try to find solutions. Using all the scientific power, all the brains we have, interdisciplinary. So I think that's a good way. And of course, this needs to be linked with a more industrial strategy. We did it for instance, the battery sector, which was almost absent in Europe. And now, since a number of years, we try at least to sit together with all the players from throughout the battery value chain to see what are our assets, where are we weak, what can we do as policymakers to support this value chain, to make sure that, in future, we create jobs in this new type of industry. And I think we need to identify many more sectors that will become important in the years to come in this green and digital transition. Of course, these also need to be combined with an ambitious reskilling program. because it's good to have an industrial strategy, but you also need to have the people with the right skills to be able to work in that new environment. Another element that is related to assessing where we are is, of course, the European semester. It's a tool that so far, was not very much linked to sustainability goals. This is about to change. It should be a tool that is not, about finger pointing, but it should be a tool to help countries, to advise them, to support them in their journey towards a more sustainable economy, also at the national level. And this new priority should also be translated in how the different institutions assess the success of an economy, the success of a country. It's not anymore GDP growth only, it should include many more elements, and in particular the social and the environmental dimension, which is lacking in the GDP way of looking at things. And of course, it should also be communicated much more that we need this more comprehensive. And I think this relates to for instance, also the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact that also should include these dimensions or for instance, the monetary policies developed by the European Central Bank. So there are many things that need to change. This brings me to the need for massive investments, because one thing is to design the policies, to design the frameworks to follow up. Another thing is also to find the resources really to invest in the necessary infrastructure and in the people that need to make it happen. And so I guess that one of the key issues that need to be discussed in the years to come is a tax shift. Where are the public authorities finding the money to invest in a sustainable future? So we need to shift away from labor taxation to more polluting and emission carbon taxation and so on. But also here, when designing this new type of taxation, we need to build in the social dimension, what it means for people on the ground. Can be additional resources, but they should be distributed also in a fair way. And so it's also linked, of course, to the EU budget, the own resources agenda, and the size of the budget. We now have, for the short term, this Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is good. It gives a boost. It can give a boost. Let's see what the member states will do with the money. But this is a one-off. It's for a number of years, and I think we need this for the next decades. This additional money. So I expect a nice debate in the institutions on how actually this fund could be made structural in the longer term, so that it can continue accompanying the transition in the longer run. Another element when speaking about finance is, of course, the private financing, is the financial sector. And so I think the issues related to what we call sustainable finance are very important. We need to find ways to kind of tame the financial system, make climate and sustainability risks visible and therefore also unattractive for investors. And by doing this, also reorienting capital flows towards more long-term investments and in support of climate and sustainability objectives. The human dimension should also be taken into account by rethinking the way the European Union connects with people. So this relates to how our democracy functions, because climate transition is a systemic exercise. So we need to find new ways to combine the top-down. This is necessary. You need a top-down, vision and tools and instruments, but you need to combine it with the bottom-up. And so how can we co-create solutions for the future with citizens, with local communities, with cities, new type of organizations that didn't exist a few years ago. You mentioned the young people. We also need to find ways to work with them. So ultimately, this climate transition can only succeed if it's becoming a societal project that includes everybody. So we need to build new coalitions, new ways of working together. It refers also to new business models where you see, local communities organizing decentralized energy generation, or cooperatives that work together, or local farmers that find local consumers. All these kind of things I think we need to support. The final point I want to make, and it was referred to also before, is the global dimension. We are not living on an island. Strictly speaking, the EU emissions are only about 9% of the global emissions, but this figure hides, in fact, that a lot of emissions are actually embodied in the products we import from India, from China, not in the most climate neutral way, is because our economy has, transformed over the years into a more service-oriented economy. A lot of industry has left. So this global dimension is crucial, and of course relates to the debate that we are currently having on the necessity to have a carbon border adjustment mechanism, to review our trade policies, include the sustainability issues much better. And I think it relates also to our responsibility as Europeans and Western countries more generally, that were responsible for the growth of emissions since the Industrial Revolution, to also help developing countries not to make the same mistakes as we did. We need to export our technological solutions, help them to leapfrog over polluting infrastructure. So basically use a wider toolbox of diplomatic instruments to first convince others to join us in this journey, but also help them to join us in this journey. So I leave it here, and happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, Said, really. I'm still thinking in some of the issues you have said, and I'm sure we're going to come back later in the debate in some of them. Before giving the floor to Manuela Kropp, I would like to insist, if some of you have some questions, you can put it on the chat. So I just remind you to put your name and the question, and maybe we can come back later to the question for the audience. Our last specialist today is Manuela Kropp. Manuela is a project manager of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation Brussels office. She has been working with Transform Network sometimes. You can find some of her works in the Transform Europe website. And now I give you the floor, Manuela.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marga. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is Manuela Kropp, Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung Brussels. I'm really happy to be here and to be on the panel with these interesting experts. Thanks for having me. I will concentrate my speech on one sector which was mentioned already by the other speakers, the transport sector, which links to the question of value chains, global production, and of course, it's linked to the European Green Deal, because the transformation of the transport sector is part of the Green Deal as the European Commission announced it. So why do we need to talk about this sector? It's the sector, the only sector where the greenhouse gas emissions have been rising in the last years. So although we have the Paris Climate Agreement from 2015, this sector does not meet any targets. From these emissions in the transport sector, 75% of the emissions are produced in road transport. So to meet the target of the Paris Climate Agreement, actually the sector needs to cut its emissions by 90%. So you see how big the challenge is. When we look at transport more closely, we see that most of the freight transport, which is linked to trade policy as well, and most of the passenger transport happens on road. For freight transport, it's 75% all over the EU. For passenger transport, it's 80%. So to discuss why we have this structure of the transport sector, we have to look at the reasons for the problems. For example, in the rail transport of freight, we see that the European single market is not working at all, let's say. For example, when trains travel from one member state to the other member state in the cross-border, these procedures are really complicated and technically not well developed, because in a lot of cases, the infrastructure is not sufficiently electrified. There are missing regional rail links, which makes the whole procedure of rail transport on freight much more complicated and expensive. So this is the reason why road transport is cheaper, and it's chosen in most of the cases. The same holds true for the transport of passengers. The system was liberalized some years ago, and now we have the absurd situation that we have a rail network where different rail companies compete with each other instead of cooperating. I think everybody knows it of us. Everybody who tried to travel by train to Brussels knows what I'm talking about. So of course we have to meet this challenge and invest in a well-functioning European rail infrastructure. When you look at the position of rail transport in comparison to aviation, it becomes even worse. Airlines benefit from tax breaks on aviation fuels, for example. Intra-EU aviation is exempt from VAT for passengers, and aviation gets a lot of free CO2 emission allowances in the European emission trading system. That's why people take the plane, because the tickets are cheaper and trains are more expensive, and it's more complicated to travel long distances throughout the EU. So this is one sector of rail transport. Now let's look at the automotive industry, which is a big player in the lobbying scene in Brussels, let's say. The Rosa Luxemburg Foundation published last year an interesting brochure about it. And the automotive industry is one of the most important industries in the European Union. We have 12 million workers connected to this sector in the manufacturing and in the supplying industry. Just to compare the figures, in the coal sector, for example, it's 400,000 jobs. So 12 million versus 400,000 jobs. So you see how big the challenge is if we want to transform the automotive industry and the transport sector. And here again, we need a European approach, because the automotive industry produces everywhere in the European Union. It's European value chains. So a lot of jobs depend on this sector in Slovakia, in Romania, in Czech Republic, in Sweden, in Germany, in Hungary, and France. And because this sector is so important for the labor market, it got now, in the last months, subsidies from several member states because it was quite hit by the Corona crisis. For example, the French government mobilized 8 billion euro to support the automotive industry, Italy 3 billion euro, Germany also several billion euros. But the problematic point here is that it's not really balanced. When you look at the figures of profit which the German car industry made in 2019 and 2018, it's quite stunning. They made a profit of 66 billion euro. And now they plan to take some part of the money and share it in form of dividends with the shareholders. So it cannot be acceptable that on the one hand, they get a lot of public subsidies to support the jobs and the production. They earned a lot of profit, and on the other hand, the care sector and the public transport are suffering, and also the cultural industry are suffering a lot from the COVID crisis, and yeah, a lot of people face unemployment, poverty, and do not know how to make ends meet. Now, and this is the problematic point about the Green Deal. Part of the Green Deal, which was presented by the European Commission in last December, is a shift to electric mobility. That means a shift to electric cars. And why is it problematic? It is problematic because actually electric cars are not really more ecological or cleaner than a normal combustion car. When you look, when you take a life cycle assessment and you look at the whole energy that is used to produce electric batteries, the energy that is used to extract the raw materials like cobalt, nickel, and lithium, then you see that a big electric car is as dirty as a small, efficient combustion car. So this shift to e-mobility is part now of the European industrial strategy, and it's nice that we have now European industrial strategy, but the problem is that the focus is wrong. So they choose the wrong means. Yeah, and when you have a look at the European directive to decarbonize the cars, so the emission standards for passenger vehicles and vans, you see, of course, that this directive supports this shift. So these electric cars, which consume or have already consumed a lot of energy during their production, they are counted in this directive as emission-free, which is absurd because they are not emission-free. And this shift gives a certain, how to say, push to the production of big, dirty SUVs. Their production is skyrocketing. There are actually, this is actually the kind of cars where our car makers can really make a lot of profit because people are willing to pay much more money to own such a car. And in the European directive for emission standards, the electric cars are counted as emission-free, and the CO2, the amount of CO2 is counted only on average for the whole fleet. That means for a car manufacturer, the more e-cars you have in your fleet, the more SUVs you can produce. And this is what is already happening. And that's the reason, one of the reasons why the emissions are rising and rising and rising in the transport sector. So this is really a worrying trend and we have to stop it. There is another loophole now for the automotive industry to safeguard their sales. It's the plug-in hybrids. It's now the new big buzzword, and actually the sales are also skyrocketing. Plug-in hybrids are cars with a normal combustion engine and an electric engine. And actually they are counted as low emission cars, although they are not. As I already explained, it's absurd to count an electric car as low emission or even emission free. So, and then we have a point where the European energy policy and transport policy overlap. And this is actually when you look at the electricity mix that we have in the European Union. Only 28% of the electricity produced in the European Union comes from renewable energy sources. That means our electric cars will run mostly on nuclear power, on coal power, and on gas, electricity from gas, and only for 28%, let's say, from renewable sources. The European Commission, and this is really a problem, announced some weeks ago, I quote, "We will not stand in the way of nuclear power." What is meant by that? It's meant that when the European Commission can make a decision on state aid, to confirm if state aid is allowed or not, then they will vote in favor of the construction of new nuclear power plants, as they already did with Hinkley Point C in UK and for Pax 2 in Hungary. And this is really a problem because here they vote in favor, but when it comes to renewable electricity, for example, they are really strict when it comes to subsidies. They changed the successful subsidy scheme for renewable electricity in the last year. They took the state aid rules as that's what was the reasoning. They said, yeah, well, state aid rules do not allow it. And they abolished the feed-in tariffs, the fixed feed-in tariffs. The fixed feed-in tariffs were actually the reason why in Germany, the share of renewable electricity increased and grew successfully, and why a lot of energy communities could be set up and energy cooperatives, citizens could produce their own renewable electricity and benefit from the fixed feed-in tariff. And this support scheme was abolished and changed now to some, I can explain it, it's a bit technical, but to a tendering scheme, which makes it for small producers much more difficult to participate in the market. So this is what's happening right now. So this is all bad news. So, but I have a good news now. I come to the good news. In January this year, the Hans Böckler Stiftung published, the German Hans Böckler Stiftung published a really interesting study. They took Germany as a case and wanted to see, okay, if Germany makes a big shift away from individual passenger cars traffic to much more public transport and rail transport, what would happen to the labor market in Germany? And they found out that actually there would be some kind of job losses, but not as big as we are all worried about. It will not happen in this scale because a lot of alternative employment can be created in the production of vehicles for public transport and rail transport. And I mean, the study was done now for Germany, but if it's possible for Germany, then it should also be possible for other member states to create alternative employment. And with this, I come to my last point, which gives a bit of it's a list of political demands. What do we need to do now? How can we transform the transport sector and transform our economy to stay within the planetary boundaries? So first of all, we need a European industrial policy, but it has to be a progressive and ecological industrial policy. That means it has to support rail transport, public transport, and of course, renewable energy, because the energy sector is the sector where most of the greenhouse gas emissions are produced. We have to abolish the Stability and Growth Pact. Why? Because member states need more room to maneuver if more finances are necessary for counter-cyclical activities in the economy, in the Keynesian way, let's say. We need a European public procurement framework which has the locality, the location where production takes place as a criterion. That means, for example, if Bombardier in Alstom, which produces vehicles for public transport, if they win an open call for tendering, that's good. Then of course they can choose the site of production freely. And in order to stop the trend of deindustrialization in Spain, in Italy, in France, and also in Eastern European countries, in order to stop this, of course, the question where things are produced has to be answered, and it must be a criterion for open calls for tendering. We have to change the European state aid rules. They must be in favor of renewable energy and public and rail transport. They must not be in favor of coal power generation, gas, and nuclear power. That must be clear. And actually, what the European Commission is doing is when they make these decisions on European state aid, they give the impression that their decisions are not political, but of course they are political. They give the impression that it's all about having a level playing field and enabling the competition. But when you look at the costs, for example, of the nuclear power plant Hinkley Point C in UK, it costs billions of euro to construct it. And then the incumbent, the company, gets some kind of guarantee for the electricity price for the next years. And actually this price is much higher than the price at the wholesale market for electricity, because renewable electricity is quite cheap actually. So it's clear that we have to change the state aid rules. The next reform is announced for next year, 2021. And we have to make sure that these decisions cannot be made alone by the Commission, as it is happening now. It has to be part of a democratic process, of course. So we have to make sure that the European Green Deal, as announced last year, becomes a left Green New Deal, which ensures just transition for the workers in the automotive industry, in the energy sector, which ensures training, it was mentioned already, upskilling, democratic participation of the workers and the trade unions, which ensures that the new jobs which are created are covered by collective bargaining agreements. You know, there is this worrying trend that more and more jobs are not covered by any collective bargaining agreements. It must be decent jobs. We need much more jobs in the care sector, so we need investments there. The care sector does not produce any greenhouse gas emissions, or only on a very low level. So these are the sectors we have to invest in. And of course, we need a working time reduction to distribute the existing work on more shoulders. So it was also mentioned already, we need planning at state level, and we need public ownership of companies. The state must play a much more active role than it does now. And actually the EU treaties are silent on the question of public ownership. So it's possible within the existing treaties to do that. We have to cut fossil fuel subsidies. 50 billion euro are spent all over the EU every year for subsidies for fossil fuels, so for gas, coal, gasoline, diesel, and so on and so forth. And compare this figure, 50 billion, with 16 billion. 16 billion is the amount of money that was invested last year in wind energy all over the European Union. So you see how big this amount of money of subsidies for fossil fuels is. Yeah, we need a European industrial policy for green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is necessary for steel production, for the decarbonization of cement production in the European Union, and we should go for it. But we have to exclude blue hydrogen, for example, blue hydrogen, which is produced by coal or gas electricity. Actually, blue hydrogen is still part of the hydrogen strategy, which was presented by the European Commission this summer. So when you take the whole life cycle of blue hydrogen, then it's clear that it's not an ecological solution, because you produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions when this hydrogen is produced. So we have to make sure that the battery cell production, which is necessary for smaller amount of electric cars, and which is also necessary for the storage of electricity, this production should not only happen in Germany and Hungary, for example, but we have to make sure that these factories are also installed, for example, in Spain, where a lot of regions face deindustrialization. So to make sure that people support our ecological transformation. So we need less cars, we need smaller cars, we need much more public transport and rail transport. Yeah, we need an ecological mobility industry. And the last point is, and it was also already mentioned, the social dimension. The left Green New Deal has to include, of course, the right to energy. Energy must not be a commodity, but it's a basic social right. And more households in the European Union face disconnections. That means that the supply of electricity or of gas is cut because they cannot pay the bills on time. So we have to ensure that people get a guaranteed smaller amount of electricity and gas, even if they cannot pay the bill on time. And to make sure that energy is not a commodity, but a basic social right. It's not possible that 10% of Europeans have problems heating their homes in winter, and 20% of the Europeans have problems to cool their apartments in summer. And last point, we need alliances, we need cooperation between the climate movement and the workers' movement. And there is a nice example, it happened some months ago in Germany. There, the movement of Fridays for Future supported the strike of the workers in the public transport sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuela, for sharing with us all this knowledge and all this data and all this alert of what is happening in the transport sector and the automobile sector in Europe. So now let me come back and give up the floor for some minutes again to the representative of the three foundations, think tanks of the progressive forces. And after that, I would like to give the floor to Bela Galozzi, which is with us. He's a senior researcher of the European Trade Union Institute, which is another think tank of the left. and I would love to hear what he's thinking about your contribution. But let us start first for the first reaction to your speeches. Let us start with Connie, after that Uwe, and finally with Aurélie. So Connie, do you have some remarks to do?
At first, many thanks for and congratulations for your presentation. It was really impressive. Also every presentation was full of ideas and thinking, and so it's not easy to make a first comment to all this full ideas. One question or one remark to Jonathan. Also, the question of growth to discuss is not really a new question, but you put it on the table and you put it in the orientation: grow, stagnation, recession. And we have to go down with everything. That is clear, that is understandable. At the same time, we have the problem of infrastructure. Infrastructure was in your presentation a moment of growth. When I have understood Said correct, then he think about the question of infrastructure in another dimension. Infrastructure, and also Manuela put it on the table, the infrastructure more connected with the care production or with another kind of European industry. My question is, when we want, and Said demanded from us, that we looking for a coherent strategy, in which way we can bring together the reducing of growth connected with the new kind of European investment policy, with another kind of industry, European industry policy, and how we can change such kind of policy, especially the question of industry, European industry. Also for the automotive industry, is it clear? Also the major player in this goal is the German automotive industry. And in which way is it useful to change such kind of industry? And what are the conflict dimension on this way? Said, you spoke also, or you mentioned the dimension of democratization in this process. It was only a small remark. Maybe you could give me more content to the question of democratization. Of course, also the slogan, we have to think global and we have to act local. It's a nice solution, and also the question connected in which way we have to develop our mega cities, for example. Saskia Essen spoke a lot of the question of metropole development, the development of the metropole cities. Is it really possible to find another way in such kind of develop of cities, especially the urban cities and the mega cities, in which way we can change such kind of things? My question was also, we spoke about, or you spoke about the partners of, the cooperation partners in the way of just transition, in the way of socio-ecological transformation. Not so much was present the trade unions. What should be the role of the trade unions, or what can be the role of the trade unions, and in which conflicts they are? That would be also interesting. And the last point from my side, I have to rethink everything. I'm only starting this thinking in this moment, or I restart my own thinking. The question of the cost of transition, I think that is really important. The cost of transition, what does it mean, and how we can make it visible, the cost of transition in such way that is not demotivating our partners. In which way is it possible to translate this topic? That's all from my side. Many thanks.
I told you she knows how to make questions, really. Thank you very much, Kani. So, Uwe, please, do you have some reaction to the speakers?
Yeah, Thank you, Marga. I think what all the three inputs made clear is that we need a much more comprehensive change of paradigm in politics than ever before. And I think a little bit that the question we are facing is not the knowledge about what we have to do, what we should better do. This is overwhelming, the knowledge. But how do we put it in practice, in political practice? That seems to be the problem. So if you take the three inputs we had over the last 45 minutes together, I would say I can understand Fridays for Future when they say, how dare you continue with politics as usual, given the facts we have. So what I found in the different inputs was different points where we could enter in a debate about how to do politics to change and to reach a new paradigm. Different things where we should start with were mentioned a whole lot. I don't want to repeat them, but I think the real problem we are facing is the question, how can we take citizens along in what we have to do once what is necessary to do will affect their lifestyle? It will significantly affect their lifestyle. Manuela, when you say we can't afford SUVs any longer, I mean, there are plenty of people around who like SUVs. They don't want to give it up. And this, I mean, we have all over the place. So the trouble, I think, we're in particularly in Western Europe or in EU Europe, is that we have democratic systems where we have to find a majority to change politics. In China, it's different. The Russians can do it differently. And even Trump tried to do it differently. I don't want to comment more on this, but the way he was approaching the issue was like an authoritarian state. So my question to the three input givers would be this side of the medal, the mobilization. How do we make sure that people come along on the way to such a radical change in paradigm? And then I think what's necessary among us, or say the political currents we are cooperating with or we're representing here, we probably should really sit down and see where do we have common ground and where do we have to work to reach a consensus or at least an agreement. I see a lot of common ground in the analysis, but I'm afraid there will be different positions in regard to the strategies, how to face the shared problem, or if you want so, threat perception. So, I mean, my question to the three would be to enlarge a little bit on mobilization strategies that help us to take citizens along once we are living in democracies and not in monolithic states.
Thank you very much. So the question is there. So let's go to Aurélie. Aurélie, do you want to make some remark, please?
Je vais essayer de ne pas en faire trop parce que après il n'y aura plus assez de temps pour le débat et c'est évidemment la difficulté dans ce genre de débat, c'est comme on a tous une grande conscience du fait que tous les problèmes sont liés, on a tous très envie de parler de tout en même temps, moi y compris, mais je pense que c'est quand même dans ce qui nous rassemble, c'est important de pouvoir confirmer qu'il y a en tout cas une conscience l'urgence des enjeux et de l'interconnexion entre les différents problèmes. Pour moi, ça, c'est quand même déjà une bonne base de collaboration. Après, je partage avec eux cette question de finalement des stratégies. Et j'ai envie d'aller un pas plus loin, de manière peut-être un peu plus provocatrice, sur le fait finalement que de tout ce que j'ai entendu aujourd'hui, et puis finalement de ce qu'on sait de notre action politique, de nos actions politiques respectives, c'est qu'il y a évidemment beaucoup de points de convergence sur l'analyse, sur la manière enfin sur les différents éléments des problèmes, on va dire. Mais d'une part, il n'y a pas forcément le même focus, à la limite, c'est pas grave, c'est la richesse aussi d'avoir plusieurs perspectives politiques. Mais par contre, on n'a pas toujours un accord quand il s'agit finalement de faire vraiment des choix, quand il s'agit par exemple de vote au Parlement, quand il s'agit de choix, je pense comme Jonathan l'a dit tout à l'heure, à un moment de décider de ne plus faire certaines choses, donc les choix difficiles. Et je pense que là, j'aurais envie de challenger, on ne dit pas comme ça en français, de mettre au défi dans les minutes qui restent nos orateurs, voilà, de peut-être aussi pointer un choix vraiment important qu'ils pensent qu'il faudrait faire. Et je pensais notamment, enfin il y en a plein, hein, mais je pensais notamment à la question de la transition, et c'est aussi pour faire le lien avec les syndicats, la transition en termes de secteur. Si à un moment on se dit, voilà, il y a certains secteurs, que ce soit dans le transport, que ce soit l'industrie lourde, qui vont devoir changer, qui vont devoir en fait, et c'est notre perspective, réduire, comme Jonathan l'a souligné, la question de l'échelle, qui vont devoir réduire. Comment on fait ? Parce qu'on va être confronté et on doit être confronté à des changements, voilà, à des changements des transitions au niveau de l'emploi. On doit pouvoir, à la fois, on doit pouvoir soutenir la transition de ce secteur, mais on doit pouvoir dire à un moment, les mines de charbon, c'est pas possible. Ou l'industrie lourde de production, enfin très polluante, d'acier ou autre, c'est plus possible non plus. Mais évidemment, juste dire ça, c'est pas suffisant. Et donc, comment à la fois on peut assumer certains choix qui sont pas faciles, mais pouvoir assurer qu'on a une transition juste et qu'on a un soutien aussi en termes des travailleurs et de la reconversion des travailleurs vers une économie qui soit vraiment durable. Donc c'est un exemple, il y en a plein d'autres, mais j'avais envie d'un petit peu provoquer là-dessus pour les minutes qui restent encore.
It's precisely because we want to talk also about just transition, about the trade unions and what the workers are thinking about it. I would like to invite Bella Galgotti to speak with us. Bella is a senior researcher of the European Trade Union Institute. So Bella, please, the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I try to be real short now, so I will only focus on a few points. And first of all, there is absolutely no question about it that we have to fundamentally reform the production and consumption model we have. And not only fundamentally, but radically. So what we have done in the last 30 years, we need to do 4 times as much in the same period of time until 2050. So it's a huge transformation. And it's of course true that you cannot do that on the back of people. And we need to bring the people with. But what does it mean? First of all, I think it's important to face reality and put all these transformations into the context of real societies and real workplaces. And the picture is not very rosy. Yeah, so it is not an easy environment. We know that inequality is high and growing. We know that working conditions are more deteriorating than they improve. the way how the new job generating new jobs are more fixed term and unsecure. So this means that for normal people, the perspective of change appears to lose something, because in their daily experiences, they always saw that change means losing. So this needs to be changed. And that means that what had been declared very often by international organizations, the ILO and the UNEP and the European Commission, etc., that a just transition should be an integrated element of any climate policy, and it needs to be a comprehensive package and so on. But these were always declarations, so we simply don't have. So what we have for just transition, and also in the current European Green Deal and also in the recovery packages, is just a small little tip. And particularly it is only focused mostly on coal transitions and not over-encompassing package. So we need a different labor market policy setting that is encouraging change and not making change difficult. And this is really difficult in the practice, and it depends very much on the particular socio-economic context of a country and the region. So these policies, concrete policies, are needed that are tailored to the country, the sector, and the region. And this is a difficult process, and we are still very much at the beginning. So much more needs to be done on that side, and in particular, the just transition mechanism needs much more policies and also resources. The last thing I would say, what can we learn from COVID? Because we are living in this context now, and there are some lessons, many lessons, but to just mention a few. This is again a reminder that if we don't take action to tackle the climate emergency, we will end up in a situation where the only thing that could happen is a lockdown. I mean, the lockdown, that means freezing everything down. That would be zero carbon, but also zero activity. And this is what nobody wants. So that's why we need to have ambitious policies and well in advance. The other thing is that times of uncertainty like now, there is a danger that a conflict reappears that we thought is already behind us. And this conflict is conflict between environmental climate objectives on the one hand and employment and social objectives on the other. So that, and then when at times of crisis, it comes up that any job or any growth is better than no growth and no job. So this means a recovery at any price, so we need to find a better way than that. And the last thing is that we learned in this crisis dealing with the COVID situation that the state has much more power than we thought before. And the state can do a lot more. And this means that the state also has to be a lot more in tackling the climate crisis, because there is a public responsibility there. It is not any other, it is not like any other transition. It's a transition for the interest of humanity. So the state has a role. Thank you, that was it.
Thank you very much, Bella. I will go to your studies that I think I can find it easily. I found it before. just to read more about just transition and your ideas. So let's go back to the speakers. We don't have too much time, so I ask you to be very briefly. We are going to be in the opposite order, if you don't mind. So Manuela, would you start with your reaction to the reactions, please?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for your reactions. Yeah, first of all, a good example for a good transition, which happened in Germany between 1998 and 2005. We had a green social democratic government in Germany, and they introduced the famous EEG, the law to support renewable energy. And when this law was adopted in 2000, in the electricity mix of Germany, the share of renewable electricity was 5%. And a lot of experts and a lot of technicians and a lot of, there was a lot of opposition, and people said it's not possible to increase the share of renewable electricity in such a short time that you are planning. And the law was adopted. It introduced these fixed feed-in tariffs, this support scheme, and suddenly a transition happened and nobody died. And the light bulbs were still on. And industrial production did not stop in Germany. And today we have 40% of renewable electricity in the energy mix of Germany. And it was done by a law and a lot of investment and subsidies and so on and so forth. So maybe we need more courage to start things and to explain things to people, that they do not associate change with loss and negative consequences, but also with positive consequences, creation of new jobs, development of the society, climate protection, and so on and so forth. Yeah, the question of SUVs, I mean, there was a time where we did not have any SUVs, and now we have the impression that we cannot live without them. I think we should not focus on SUVs. It was just an example. Actually, for the automotive industry, because they suffer so much from overcapacity in the global market. For them, the SUV is a strategy. I can understand that they do it. They want to earn money. So,
Manuela, I didn't want to debate about
sorry,
SUVs.
can I finish, Uwe? I'm sorry, Uwe. I will be very, very, very brief. Don't worry. Okay. No. The thing is that we need regulation by our governments, by our democratically legitimized governments. And if we have the power and the majority in the parliaments to change this kind of economic policy, then we should do it. And SUVs is just an example. I mean, take the rail, the freight transport on our motorways and highways, for example. It's clear that it will even increase in the coming years. This is a consequence of the European single market and of the deindustrialization of the European Union. And I don't think that that any person likes this picture of having a continuous traffic jam on the right lane. I mean, people will not feel that it's a loss if this changes. And maybe we have to start also small. This is what Uwe already mentioned, like also from bottom up. Why don't we start a program, 1 million solar panels, 1 million roofs with solar panels, for example, in a member state? So I think it's too difficult to explain to the people that we need the big transformation and everything has to change. I can understand that people don't like it. I don't like it either. So we have to start in the different sectors with different small and bigger steps. And I think in the transport sector, there's a lot to win. Thank you.
Uwe, do you want to make some remark?
No, that was okay. I mean, I also didn't want to discuss SUVs. The trouble is that if people are personally affected, it's more difficult to change their minds. Yeah? But it's you gave a good answer, Manuela. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So, Said, do you want to take the floor, please?
Thank you very much, and thanks also for the many questions. I mean, on mobility, we could speak a long time. I've been a member of the European Parliament 10 years in the Transport Committee. It's fascinating and it's very complex. But I agree that we should not only focus on vehicles, but more look at the entire mobility system and see also how this very expensive asset, you know, a car is actually so expensive and not used. It's used only 8% of the time. How can this be, this money, these resources used in a much more efficient, effective way, you know, by sharing things, by sharing mobility, public transport, and so on and so on. That's for another debate. But there were a few questions. First on, yeah, the question of growth and degrowth. I like it a lot, but it refers a bit to my intervention when I said we should not so much look at, you know, GDP growth. We need to define maybe something new that captures better what we really want to achieve, which is a good outcome for people. Do people have access to mobility, to health, to education, have a safety net in case they are in trouble? I think we need to think in this way. Sometimes it can mean growth. Not for those people who have 3 cars. For them, 2 cars, even 1 car is a degrowth scenario. But for those people who have no access to mobility, you know, we need to develop the tools to make them have access to mobility. For these people, it's growth. Maybe in Africa, there is still room for growth, you know, because many people have no access to basic services. So we need to grow, stimulate the economy. But we need to do it in a sustainable way. As long as it is, let's say, resource efficient, if we reuse the same resources over and over again, and we do it within the planetary boundaries, I don't have so much problems with growth. But coming to some other questions, there was the issue of democratization. I mean, that is crucial because, you know, people need to feel connected to this transition and need to be part of the transition. So that's why I strongly believe in the strength of local communities and cities in particular. And so how to do it in practice, I think that the European Commission should devote more attention to how it can actually help local communities to, you know, create their own climate plans, share experiences. There is this idea now as part of the missions to identify first 100 cities and later on so many more, with which the Commission wants to develop a climate city contract, sharing knowledge, experience, resources, money, make sure that you know, on the ground it is a participative process that prepares these plans and so on and so on. We can go into more details another time. There was this question. There are 2 more questions I want to quickly respond. First, the issue of showing the costs and avoid to make it, you know, something people fear. I think first, if you are transparent, you will quickly see that showing the cost of action versus non-action, becomes clear for people that non-action is actually much more expensive and will actually affect the poor much more than all the others. So it's actually socially smart to invest soon in the transition to avoid higher costs later on, especially because there are also many co-benefits in addressing global warming and climate change. It's also about quality of life in our cities, reducing air pollution, altogether with reducing emissions, and so on and so on. But I agree, we need to find a good narrative to convince people. And this brings me to the other point, the role of trade unions in this transition. I mean, to make it a success, I already said that we need to have industrial strategies for many more sectors than today. This needs to be done at European level, of course, but then it needs to be implemented. And in order to develop these strategies, and you need to start early to make it successful. And you need to involve the trade unions as partners from day one. We focus a lot on the coal mine regions and the energy intensive regions. Actually, these transitions will occur everywhere, and everywhere there will be also problems to solve. And I think that in every region, they should have regional development plans where the trade unions, the local businesses, the local authorities, universities, and so on, need to, well in advance, start thinking about alternative growth strategies. Huh? This is easy. I mean, for coal mine regions, let's say we know that they need to close their coal mines in 20 years, let's say. Okay, you can start today. And today we need to start working on the alternative, on the next step, and help people to reskill and you know, invest in greenfield investments, attract new companies, and so on and so on and so on. I leave it here because there are so many interesting things to add, but the time is running.
It's much interesting as to hear you. Thank you very much, Said. So, Jonathan, please, the last remark.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today. So I was just going to start by responding to Connie's point, and for me, I picked up two things. One was about growth, and one was about the role of trade unions. Well, I say yes, there should be a greater trade union role, and the example I would give was one I was listening to last night in a webinar hosted by the PCS, the Public and Commercial Services Union in the UK, and they had an example from Green Jobs Oshawa, which is a car manufacturer in Canada, where the workers have got together to campaign of how they can shift from a shrinking car manufacturing situation to making what we need that's socially useful instead. And I think that sums up car production. Now, as we shift to electric vehicles and also scale down the number of vehicles in total, you know, there are going to be less cars. As we reduce the car manufacture, there's going to be less need to produce steel across the EU. We have a surplus steel production. We need to reduce it and use our scrap to make a circular steel economy instead, which will again reduce jobs in the steel making industries. So we currently have a situation where lots of jobs are trapped in high carbon sectors. And I think we need to move the EU from, let's say, a car full and carefree Europe to maybe much more closer towards a car-free and careful Europe, shifting jobs, not just within sectors, but to completely different jobs, much more jobs in terms of caring better to maintain what we've already got rather than building more and increasing how we care for each other. But we need to balance the trade union role with a reduction in the dominance of business and finance. The cheapest way to transition is to manage down demand at the same time as building up our renewable energy. That means we need to do things like right-size aviation and use the shift out of COVID, not to build back the jobs which have been lost, but shift them into new sectors of employment. And I agree with Uwe's challenge that we need to really get up and respond when the Fridays for the Future challenge us as politicians to be different. But I don't believe we will be different enough unless we are brave enough to lead to a change in our economics and a change in how business dominates the directions in which we go. The greater role for citizens, I think, is all about employment. We don't just want citizens to be involved in their spare time. The SUVs, I think we need to think of the SUVs currently as a 10-year blip rather than a way to the future. And Bella talked about COVID and how that's locking in us and reducing our freedoms. I think we need to consider we have a better way of building out of COVID. So we unlock our social freedoms, but instead we lock in the limits of our environmental damage, our climate impacts. And that means the kind of controls we have had on individuals, that's the kind of restrictions we need to have on infrastructure growth. So we should limit growth in what leads to greater carbon emissions in construction and use. Limit it to zero. because we can't afford to make the problem worse rather than while we try to solve it. So we need to scale up renewable energy. For example, roads, take roads. We can use the existing road space better if we shift it from a mixed traffic to public transport, walking and cycling. All have a much higher persons per hour lane density use. We don't need to build any more transport infrastructure at all across Europe, across the world. That's what I mean by doing things differently. And then in terms of the question of mobilization, I would say we need to match this honesty about how we need to limit the growth in what makes our economy bigger each year in terms of material and energy use, with an honesty about the disasters and the difficulties that are already locked in because of climate change. The future is going to be difficult. Areas are going to be flooded that are currently land. It's going to create tensions and problems around the world. And we can only deal with that if we do as Aurélie says and come together. I mean, I would say that I'm a red-green. I'm wearing red on the outside, but I'm green in the middle. Maybe for others, it will be round the other way. But I think that's how we need to see it. I mean, the future is about equality, which is maybe the #1 red value, but also environmental limits, which is the #1 green value. But only if we hold both together will we get to where we're going. And I think we also share the values which we need to do that journey. We need to be about creating livelihoods and jobs, but we also need to challenge the governance of our economy, which allows businesses and financiers to gamble on our future rather than us to invest in the employment which will create that transition. So I really hope that, you know, that honesty about doing things differently will translate into the word which I think we need above any other word, which is hope. And I'm going to leave us on the word hope. I think there was a question from Uwe about, you know, to what extent our politicians can tell the public what to do. I think on green and social issues, both, on environmental and social issues, both, most of the public are ahead of the politicians, not the other way around, because the politicians are still following businesses and they're still following the money. We need to redirect the money to a different future. And I think we will inspire people to join us on that journey when we as politicians dare to lead outside of the mainstream and deliver the radical vision of a different future, which is not just what we all are demanding, but what we all deserve.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your last speak, and thank you all of you for attending this seminar. Let me put in an end just only saying that in times of crisis, it's also times where the opportunity is open to change things. And also, I do believe that any big change starts with a big conversation. The bigger people speaking about one problem, the most possibilities we have to find not only a solution, but as Said suggested, the idea of having a society project in order to avoid climate change and social injustice at the same time. Thank you very much to all the speakers, and thank you for all the 3 think tanks, Transform Europe, FEPS, and GEF, for this seminar that bring to my mind a lot of ideas that maybe Connie and Uwe and Amélie, Aurélie, we can think together how to go in a future seminars, probably more concrete questions on the basis of the common diagnosis we have done today and the differences too, because I love dialogue among difference. I'm not there to have a different opinion on other at all. Also, I learned by the challenge of somebody thinking different from me in a particular thing. So I would like to go in that road in order to exchange our ideas, sharing the knowledge, which is very important also, and at the same time start and continue this huge conversation on this particular issue, which I think is bring us some hope, as Jonathan suggests, for the rest of the people in our continent. Thank you very much, Jonathan, Said, Manuela, for your speakers, and I hope we can see each other and read you all your researches and suggestions that I'm sure it will be helpful for all of us. Thank you very much for attending this seminar, and I hope to see you soon.